Hello and welcome to episode number 5 of the Heart Containers podcast for Friday, February 1st. Heart Containers is a daily Nintendo show where Monday through Friday we discuss what's going on within the world of Nintendo. I'm your host, Rami Fawaz, and today the main topic that we're going to be really diving into is Nintendo's third quarter financial briefing. Yeah, that doesn't really sound exciting, but trust me, we're going to cut out all of the really boring bits and focus on the big announcements. One of those being that Nintendo just revealed a new mobile game, Dr. Mario World, and that's coming to iOS and Android later this year. So we're going to talk about a lot of the highlights in the briefing that happened over the past 2 days, and that's something that we're really going to get into later on in the show. But before we get into that, it's important to start with some housekeeping, and I want to remind you guys about some things that are going on that you might be interested in. The first one is that a game called Wargroove is actually releasing today. It's available right now if you're listening to this podcast, and it is a game that I think is worth your attention. I discovered this game over a year ago as it was being advertised alongside the Switch, and the first thing that I noticed about Wargroove was the art style. It looks stunning. It has pixel art, but in the best way that it possibly can, where you can tell that the artist excruciatingly added a lot of polish and detail to every single animation, where it looks so crisp and clean that you kind of just want to get lost in watching that game. It reminds me a lot of Owlboy for how much attention to detail they put in the art style, and Wargroove is absolutely no exception. But beyond just looks, Wargroove is kind of a spiritual successor to Advance Wars. Advance Wars is a series that Nintendo has kind of neglected for the past couple generations, and so it's nice to see a third party, or, I don't mean that in the literal sense, but kind of like an outside party coming in to kind of pick up the Advance Wars mantle, and it looks like Wargroove is doing just that. I have this game pre-downloaded. I'm excited to get into it. I'm just waiting, honestly, for this podcast to end. The moment I finish recording, I'm going to go and really play this game because it just looks so exciting. It's gotten very positive reviews. The reviews have actually ranged from positive to incredibly positive, and that's a really good spin always. And not only is all of that, for me, something really exciting, the art style, the Advance Wars inspiration, the critical acclaim, all surrounding Wargroove, but there are so many other things about this game that make it just a really good value. It's only $19.99. That's relatively cheap. I mean, I guess when you compare it to other indie games, you could say that that's high, but honestly, if Nintendo took Wargroove and slapped Advance Wars on it, I would pay the $60 price tag that they would charge. So the fact that I'm getting this game at $19.99 is a steal. It also comes with 4-player local multiplayer, as well as online cross-platform multiplayer. Yes, you can play Wargroove with people on Xbox One and PC if you have your Switch. And what did I say? And the coolest thing that I think about this game is that it comes with a map editor, which is standard for these top-down strategy games like Advance Wars, but they take it a step further. Not only can you make your own maps, but you can make your own campaign. So you can make a string of maps connected and send that to your friends so that they can play through their own Wargroove campaigns. It's a game that, again, I can't wait to get into, and it arrived on Switch today. So check that out if this at all sounds interesting to you. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that yesterday it was announced that the latest Splatfest is going to be on February 8th. Of course, Splatfest being those timed events for Splatoon 2, where they usually pick 2 sides and you have to choose between one of those sides and then play with your team in the standard turf war to decide which side reigns supreme. This latest Splatfest is going to be pancakes versus waffles. And if you know what's good, you'll pick pancakes and you'll join me, because screw waffles, man. Pancakes are where it's at. Pancakes are the far superior food, not only because it is cake. I mean, come on, man. It's cake in a pan. It says it right there in the name. Who wants a waffle when you could be eating cake in the morning? But it's so malleable. I mean, you could put anything in pancake batter and it just comes out so perfect. So if you want to join me in Team Pancake, and if you're a Team Waffle, ignore all of this news. There is no Splatfest. Don't worry about it. Write down February 8th for Team Pancake and join me in playing the latest and greatest Splatfest. The reason why I brought this up, even though it could be seen as like kind of a small thing, is that Splatoon 2 is actually on its last leg when it comes to content updates. Nintendo has said that 2019 is when they're going to stop supporting that game officially with additional content updates. So this could very well be one of the final Splatfests for Splatoon 2, and you're probably gonna have to wait till Splatoon 3 comes out to do something like this again. So if you love Splatfests and you want to make sure that you get your fill before they go away until Splatoon 3, then I encourage you to join this one. And if you haven't tried it, they're a lot of fun. They're worth seeing at least once. So if you have Splatoon 2 and you've never played in a Splatfest, February 8th to February 9th might be the time that you should really jump into it. And those are all the housekeeping things I wanted to get through. I'm going to try to do this as often as possible because often there are a lot of dates and updates that people need to remember. And since I am hosting a daily show, what better way to do that than at the top of the show to go over some of the important things and make sure that you guys know what's going on within the world of Nintendo as accurately and precisely as possible. Now, let's get into the news. The first story that I wanted to talk about is actually kind of an extension from a story that we talked about yesterday. Yesterday, I mentioned Darksiders Warmastered was unofficially/officially announced. It was unofficially announced because a trailer was found on THQ Nordic's website without their permission. They didn't want that trailer to leak, or at least, I mean, I guess they could have sneakily put that on there in hopes that someone would find it. That's interesting. But once it was released, they didn't deny it. They just kind of said, hey, there's nothing to see here. But they also didn't say anything about it either. They just kind of let it be. They let that trailer live and exist on other people's channels so you could watch it, even though they would not accept or confirm that Darksiders Warmastered was actually coming to Switch. And I had hypothesized/speculated that maybe it was because they had a deal in terms of when they could announce something like this, hoping that this might be a sign for a Nintendo Direct coming in the future. Well, if it was, it's no longer holding any water because today, or rather yesterday, THQ Nordic came out and officially confirmed that Darksiders Warmastered is coming to Switch. It's going to arrive on April 2nd, and it's going to cost $29.99. And I'm happy with that price point, especially because if you ask me, Darksiders being a 9-year-old game at this point, I don't think it really holds up that well. It feels old. It's not a bad game. It's always been a good game, and it still is a good Zelda style game. But to me, I would not pay $60, so $30 is the sweet spot for that game. So I wanted to come back and let you guys know that although it wasn't confirmed officially, it is now, and all of the things that I said in yesterday's show about potentially being announced in a Direct, yeah, totally forget about that. The next story, I think, is actually really intriguing to me. The Japanese publication Nikkei had a couple of interesting things to say about Nintendo's plans for the Switch in 2019. The first of which is actually very similar to what we've been hearing for a while now, and that's Nintendo is working on a smaller version of the Switch to be released in 2019. I'll give you the exact quote here. They said that Nintendo is, quote, miniaturizing the console with portability and playing outdoors in mind, as well as cutting features to reduce the price and expand their user base. So there's quite a few things in there that fit along with what we've heard about a Switch Lite or a Switch Mini coming in 2019. But there's more to this story that I want to keep talking about before we kind of dive into what this exactly means. The second part of that story is that Nikkei is reporting that Nintendo has plans to launch a new and or additional service aimed at online service aimed at game enthusiasts willing to pay more sometime in 2019. Those are their words mostly, so if that sounded choppy or didn't seem to make a lot of sense, don't blame me. That's just kind of how it was translated, and there are some questions about how exactly it was translated. That's why I said and or. It's not clear whether or not this new online service that they're launching is going to be in addition to Nintendo Switch Online or a completely separate service. But regardless, they're saying that it's going to be for game enthusiasts and it's going to cost more of some sort. So those are the two parts of the article that came out from Nikkei, and I want to unpack both of those. The first one about the Switch Mini, or the smaller version of the Switch that is purposely being made with portability, playing outdoors, kind of cutting features to reduce the price in mind makes a whole lot of sense to me. If you guys listened to yesterday's show, you would know that the updated numbers for the 3DS in 2019 were not very good. 65% less. So year over year, the 3DS performed hardware-wise. So the 3DS hardware sales in 2018 were 35%. Oh my God, I'm messing up all my numbers. Were 65% worse than they were in 2017. And I didn't mention this yesterday, but the same can be said for software. It was actually almost exactly 65% as well. 65% worse in 2018 than it was in 2017. So year over year, 2018 was a pretty far declining year for the 3DS. And if you read this quote, all of the things that Nakai is saying about this smaller Switch are what the 3DS already does. The 3DS is already a low price hardware model that expands the user base by attracting a wide demographic. It does not have as many features as the Switch, obviously. It is perfect to be brought outdoors. I mean, I feel way more comfortable leaving my 2DS in the grass, for instance, than my Switch, and it's a miniaturized console. And if the 3DS is really no longer selling, which the numbers are indicating, then it's time for Nintendo to have a replacement for that if they really do care for the marketplace that the 3DS was really catering to. So I totally buy in to the smaller Switch version. I just have a lot of questions about what this means. If it is a smaller Switch and it doesn't have the same feature set, well, is it really a Switch? Like, what are they going to call this thing? Is it part of the Switch family just only because it plays Switch games? So I'm very curious to find out about that. The other thing is, if it really does reduce the feature set in some way, like I've heard people talk about how they might attach the Joy-Cons to the Switch and burn them in so that you cannot remove them. That might make it cheaper. It would look closer to a PlayStation Vita, for example, if you're trying to get that image into your head. But then, what about the games that require Joy-Con activity? What do they do then? Games like 1-2 Switch, which you had to play with the Joy-Con separated. It was so motion control heavy. And if you have Joy-Cons attached to your Switch that you can't remove, are you forced to buy secondary Joy-Cons and then have the Joy-Cons that you currently have on the Switch just stuck there just to play a game like 1-2 Switch? There are some real questions about this Switch Mini that I hope that we find out about sooner rather than later. And I think we will find out about it pretty soon because they have to launch this before Pokemon. That's my take on it. So for the second half of the year, I think we'll find out more about Switch Mini. And the second half is also really unique. This is something that I haven't really seen people talk about very much compared to the Switch Mini idea. An additional service, an additional online service for game enthusiasts willing to pay more. When I read that, I immediately thought, oh, this is Nintendo's way to bring back the Virtual Console. Because if they're targeting game enthusiasts, to me, that just means they're targeting passionate game fans, people who have respect for Nintendo's history and want to go back and play older games. Because honestly, if you're not that enthusiastic about gaming and playing games, you probably also don't have a fond retrospective or recollection of the old days that motivates you to want to go back and play GameCube games and 64 games, that type of thing. It's the game enthusiasts that want to do that. So I immediately jumped to Virtual Console style solutions to online services, especially when they said paying more. I wonder if this is Nintendo's way of saying 2019 they will introduce some sort of system where maybe it's a tiered system where anyone who has Nintendo Switch Online has the base tier, but if you pay a little bit more and get to another level tier, then you can get SNES games and 64 games, however they want to distribute that content. That's exactly what I think this is saying, and that's what I actually hope that it's saying as well. Now, if it's a separate service or an additional service, I don't know. They could very well be a completely different app that you have to pay for very separately that has nothing to do with Nintendo Switch Online. But I think that that's what Nakai is hinting towards with this. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds over the year. So not only could we potentially get new hardware from Nintendo in 2019, but also maybe significant changes to their online service. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more too when we really dive in to the third quarter financial update where they mention what they might do for online. But really fascinating report by Nakai. I hope that Nintendo opens their mouth and starts talking to us soon in 2019, because my God, we're at the end of January. We are a 12th of the way through with the year, and Nintendo has been very silent. Although they keep going on these Twitter raids where they just keep on announcing various things on Twitter. I mean, I found out about Dr. Mario on Twitter. I found out about Metroid on Twitter. I found out about Yoshi on Twitter. It's like they just keep on releasing these ninja stealth cuts through their media channels without ever kind of cohesively putting it all together and doing one big announcement. I'm really curious to see when they come out and decide to do that. So that was a really fun one. I'm interested to learn more. The last big story that I want to talk about before the topic of the show is partly related to the topic of the show. It's this Dr. Mario business, but I wanted to separate it out and give it its own little timepiece, because it is such an interesting proposition that's happening right now. Nintendo has officially partnered with Line Corporation to develop Dr. Mario World. It's a new mobile experience set to release for both iOS and Android in the early summer of 2019. Now, Line, if you don't know, is best known for their smartphone and PC communication app of the same name. It's called Line. And it's basically like a social messaging portal, what you would find with WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. That's kind of the same vibe that you get with Line. It's very popular in other places, especially Japan. I don't know a lot of people who use that app here, but it is kind of unique that Nintendo would be partnering with them, a communication app, not necessarily a corporation that knows that much about developing mobile games, but they do know a whole lot about developing mobile apps, specifically ones that connect people together. And there's this quote from the press release that I wanted to highlight just so you get a better idea of why or how this came about. It says that, quote, utilizing both companies' strengths, Nintendo and Line will co-develop and jointly operate a new action puzzle game featuring Dr. Mario titled Dr. Mario World to be released by Nintendo. Dr. Mario World is targeting an early summer 2019 global release, including in Japan and United States, end quote. And the only other thing that we really know about Dr. Mario World, besides the name and the release window, is that it will be free to download with in-app purchases. So we know the financial service that they're going to be using with this app. You're going to be able to download it for free, and there's going to be some sort of microtransaction. They did not detail what exactly that was. This is fascinating to me for a whole bunch of reasons. For one, we now know what the next game that Nintendo is bringing to mobile services is. It's Dr. Mario. I think that's a great idea. It's a simple concept. It's a puzzle game that you can pick up and play whenever you need to, and for that reason, it makes complete sense why they would bring it to smart devices. It's good on them for picking something like that. It is a little bit interesting that it's coming out in summer, and we just talked about how yesterday Mario Kart Tour was delayed to the summer, so now you have kind of two apps that might be cannibalizing each other at the same time. I mean, probably not, but you can tell that Nintendo probably didn't want to have both of these games coming out at the same time. But what is the most peculiar about this entire thing is the partnership with Line. Again, they're a social communication company, so I would immediately jump to this conclusion that maybe Dr. Mario World is going to have a feature set that makes use of communicating heavily with other people, which is exciting to me, because if there was one thing that Nintendo has been consistently bad at with their online anything across the board, has been linking people together and allowing people to communicate with each other and their friends in an easy and smooth way. And if they leverage the systems and the expertise that Line has to make Dr. Mario a game where you can easily play multiplayer with your friends and invite them and communicate with them in a super intuitive manner, that's something that I would get very excited about. Then I would love to see them partner with Line more on different projects, but I don't know if that's exactly what they're leveraging from Line Corporation. I just think that it's a little interesting that Nintendo is partnering with them, especially since they've partnered with multiple people so far in this mobile experiment that they've gone on over the past few years. Remember, when they first announced that they were going to do mobile, they said they were partnering with DNA, a company that had a lot of stakes in the mobile game, that knew what they were doing. But apparently it seems like that partnership is not really going as well as Nintendo had hoped if they keep on reaching out for other opportunities with other companies to help them with their latest and greatest games. So they had the DNA partnership with their latest game that just came out, Dragalia Lost. That was actually a partnership with Psy Games. I think it was Psy Games. It was a partnership with a different company. It was not DNA, and now they're partnering with Line. It kind of seems like if Nintendo gets even a whiff of a good idea to form a partnership with anyone in the mobile space, that they're going to try it. It really comes off as Nintendo being very hungry to succeed in the mobile space, which is important because they really haven't had as much success as I would imagine they would want. You can read about it in a little bit when we go and discuss the actual third quarter financials, but they actually said that their mobile revenue only accounted for 2% of their total revenue in 2018. I would imagine that they want that to be a lot higher. So them making more unique decisions with their partnerships and being more aggressive with how they tackle the mobile game makes a whole lot of sense to me. I'm excited to see what Dr. Mario World turns out to be, and I hope it really does take advantage of all of these social communication specialties that Line Corporation is known for. And with that, we're going to move in to the topic of the show, which again is all about Nintendo's third quarter financial briefing. Now, let me set some context for you guys so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Nintendo has a financial year, and what that means is that between April 1st and March 31st, that is their financial year. And they split that up into 4 quarters, with the third quarter being October to December. October 1st to December 31st. And that's kind of how they chunk up the most important quarter for them, because that is the holiday season. That's where they make all their big bucks. And obviously we're past December 31st. We're well into the new year, but it takes some time for Nintendo to kind of cross their T's, dot their I's, figure out exactly how successful they were, get all the numbers figured out and ironed out, and plan a kind of like a resolution to the quarter where they go over with their investors and tell them exactly how they performed, how they're performing overall as a company, and how they're going to move forward now that they know how well they did in the previous quarter. And that's exactly what happened in these last couple of days. They released all these documents that discussed a bunch of sales information. And that's why you've probably been, if you've been online looking at any sort of Nintendo news, you've probably been barraged with all sorts of key facts and figures about, oh, the Switch is selling like this, this game is outpacing that other game, is because these documents just got released. And the day after they got released, so yesterday, they do communications with the investors. They do a presentation where the president, Shintaro Furukawa, goes through slide by slide and explains how well they did, the things that you have to keep in mind for Nintendo in 2018, and as well as where they're going to go from here. And then after that, they usually do a Q&A with investors so that the investors can ask them questions about their new approach to how they're going to control their business from this point onward, et cetera, et cetera. So what happened yesterday was the presentation. You can go see the exact slides and Furukawa's comments on each of those slides. And it's fascinating. There's a whole bunch of tidbits that came out there, including what we just talked about, the Dr. Mario tidbit. They also cycled back on things like talking about Mario Kart Tour and a whole bunch of other really important Nintendo topics. And then what happened yesterday, on the show yesterday, so 2 days ago, were the actual results from the financial quarter, the numbers. They kind of spread it out in that way. So what I'm going to go over is that presentation that I just mentioned. Although the presentation is very long, there's a lot of information packed in there. So I kind of narrowed it down to 3 really key portions. And if you like anything that I'm talking about and you feel like you want to learn more about it, go ahead. You can go on their website. It's all publicly available and you can literally read and see the slides. They have the slides posted on there, kind of like it's basically just a PowerPoint printed out for you to look at. So I encourage you to do that. But I'm only going to focus on a handful of them for this topic of the show because I don't want to elongate the discussion well beyond what might be interesting. And again, I also want to keep it a little bit interesting. There's a lot of numbers and stuff like that. They're way more than we could ever really get into. And I think that some people aren't necessarily as interested in numbers. So let's start, as I say that, let's start with the first wave of numbers that came out here. And this is really the most important numbery type thing that came out in the presentation. So I promise we're going to get through this. And besides, it's really interesting. So even though the hardware sales for the Switch fell short of the 20 million units that they forecasted for this financial year. Again, their financial year ends in March 31st. So they forecasted that they were going to hit 20 million in this financial section and this financial year, and they missed it. They lowered their forecast to 17 million. So even though they took a step back in meeting their hardware goals, they are killing it in the software sector. So you can tell that they're not doing so hot in hardware if you compare the Switch to the Wii, which they did in the presentation. They showed this graph that clearly demonstrated that although the Switch is substantially outpacing the Wii U when compared for the same time frame, it is not outpacing the Wii. It looks like the Wii is still going to stay just ahead of the Switch, and I don't think, or they don't seem to think, that the Switch is going to be able to catch up with that. And although it is close, to me, that's a little concerning. That is actually very concerning. And the reason why I think that's a little weird, and the topic that I don't think people really bring up when it comes to Switch sales often enough, is that the Wii was in a different time period for Nintendo when they had more than just the Wii. Remember, the Wii was selling really great in the first few years of its lifespan, while they had the DS, which was also selling really great. It was double duty. I mean, they had a two-pillar system back in 2006, 2007, 2008, and both sides were smashing the charts. Today, they kind of have a two-pillar system with the 3DS and the Switch, but the 3DS at this point, especially with what we talked about earlier, is irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. It's just the Switch. And for the Switch to take over the mantle of two consoles pretty much, and to still not be able to outpace the Wii, I mean, that's scary. You can tell why Nintendo wanted to be a bit more ambitious with their forecasts. And I mean, I don't know how to read into that. If there is any positivity to take out of that news, it's that because of the situation where they are kind of taking one console and putting it in the place of two pillars, it seems, they are seeing way better effects on the software side of things because they're no longer splitting their resources in two directions. Again, in the Wii and DS era, sure, the hardware was selling really great, and granted, the software was too, but they had to split the software sales in half. So when they made a Mario Kart, they had to make a Mario Kart for the Wii and a Mario Kart for the DS. When they made a Zelda, they made a top-down Zelda for the DS, and they made Zeldas for the Wii. So they split those games in half, whereas what we're seeing with the Switch is that they're putting each one of their mainline games on the Switch, and it is the game. And I think because of that, you're seeing software sales like nobody's business, because whereas previously you used to have to split your software sales in half, and you might not necessarily get everyone who is invested in Mario Kart might not buy both Mario Karts. That's not the case anymore. And that's why we're seeing crazy numbers for the Switch's software lineup. Numbers such as, again, if you compare year over year, this is what they announced in this presentation, 2017 to 2018. They took this, it sounds arbitrary, but this range of April to December. So they're looking at April to December in 2017 and 2018. And what they discovered, or what they're reporting, is that Japan saw a 47% increase in software sales during that time period in 2018 when compared to 2017. The North Americas saw a 79% increase, and Europe saw a 91% increase. That just means that software is selling super well for the Nintendo Switch. And that goes to show that Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, a game that, again, we talked about yesterday, which sold well over 10 million units worldwide in less than a month, is now, as they reported, the fastest start to any title in Nintendo's history, period. For a home console, I guess. I don't know if that's true for handheld devices. I mean, they specified home console, but regardless, that's still an amazing achievement. And I think maybe it has to do with the fact that they're not splintering their user base across two consoles, that people can focus on singular versions of software and buy that software to unbelievable heights. And there was this one quote I want to mention, by the way, before we move on to the next thing, where Furukawa had this to say about Smash Brothers, and I thought it was just such a baller line. He said, quote, "Every fighter that has previously appeared in the Super Smash Bros. Series is in this title, hence the tagline of everyone is here. In fact, the tagline could also apply to every consumer who enjoys playing games." Like, that's so much swagger coming out from him saying, in Super Smash Brothers, everyone is here. And for how well the game is selling, you might just say that anyone who plays games is also here buying our game because, man, we're on fire. Good for you, Furukawa, and good for you for Nintendo. But the main takeaways from this segment of all of these numbers and whatever, if you didn't follow exactly what I said, it's that hardware is in a questionable place and software is doing incredibly well. So you're kind of in this awkward place where, no, the Switch isn't selling poorly hardware wise. It's just not selling nearly as well as they probably want it to. But the software is breaking records that I don't think anyone had anticipated, including Nintendo, because they actually increased their software forecast for this financial year while they decreased the hardware forecast. So that was the first big takeaway that I really gleaned from this presentation. The second one, not about numbers, but it's actually about the company's overall business strategy for the foreseeable future. How are they going to move forward as a company? And this is what Furukawa had to say is going to be at the core of Nintendo for the foreseeable future. He said, quote, or not the quote yet, it is to, quote, continue to expand the number of people who have access to Nintendo IP, end quote. That's it. That is their vision for the future. That is the overarching, top down, big picture type thing. They're going to continue to expand the number of people who have access to Nintendo IP. And some of the ways that he mentioned that they expect to do this is by actively using their IP in various kinds of entertainment besides just games. They want to grow that exposure to anyone and everyone that they possibly can. That's why they're doing mobile. That's why they have movie deals. That's why they have theme park deals. They just want their IP out there as much as humanly possible. But the more interesting thing about what he was talking about this overall goal, is that he talked a lot about Nintendo accounts. And Nintendo accounts, when he says that, he's actually referring to both My Nintendo and Nintendo Switch Online. They both fall under this Nintendo account category. And what he said about Nintendo accounts was, quote, they're going to be why do I keep saying that? They're going to be, quote, the foothold for constructing long-term relationships between consumers and Nintendo, end quote. So if you take all of this together and you're asking yourself, okay, what does this really mean? Well, Nintendo has a goal, and their goal is we want people to interact with their IP. That's it. That's basically the overarching strategy for Nintendo for the next few years. And the way that they want to do that is step one, putting it in front of people's faces as easily as they possibly can. So that people can go to Universal Studios and they see Mario. They can go to the movie theater and they see Mario. They can go open their phones and they see Animal Crossing. They are constantly introduced to the intellectual properties. But what they're saying with this Nintendo account stuff is that the next step in that process is getting people into their online service in some way. Now, whether that means getting people paying a subscription, like encouraging this casual user perhaps that doesn't know a lot about Nintendo, but is all of a sudden introduced to, let's say, Animal Crossing through Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, how do they get that person to register a Nintendo account or to actively participate in a Nintendo account or to pay for a subscription with a Nintendo account? That is their long-term strategy for building relationships between consumers and Nintendo. It's actually really interesting. I'm not sure how they're going to do that. I would assume that they're going to be beefing up their online account system with a bunch of stuff if they're going to they have to compete with a lot of other subscription services and online services in general if they're going to encourage even the most casual user to grow this relationship between them and Nintendo. So I'm not sure what they're going to do. I wonder if this hints towards what we were talking about earlier with Nakai about offering more services that allow people to play games, or they didn't necessarily say that, but enticing people with various online services so that they make the jump into paying for whatever it is that Nintendo's offering and thus building the stronger relationship between them. But at the end of the day, the reason why I picked this part out of the presentation was because it's interesting to know that their overarching goal, which has changed wildly over the past multiple generations. I mean, during, again, the Wii and DS era, the goal was not necessarily to continue to expand the number of people who have access to Nintendo IP. It was actually to expand the gaming population as a whole. They wanted to reach many different demographics. They didn't want to uh, they wanted to expand the demographics of gaming as a home console and handheld traditional sense. They didn't necessarily want to do what they're doing here, which was take their IP and spread it almost everywhere. Like make the IP the important thing here, not the hardware itself. So this is where Nintendo is moving towards in the future. And the last part about this presentation that I really wanted to highlight is how they plan on achieving that goal. And they have 3 pillars that they segmented. They said these are the 3 pillars of Nintendo moving forward. Pillar number 1, dedicated video game business. That's what you think about when you think of Switch and 3DS. That's also the bucket that they're putting Nintendo Switch Online in. And they're going to continue this business. So anyone that's worried that because their overarching goal is talking about intellectual properties and not, traditional home consoles or anything like that, don't worry. They're saying that it's still a very important part of their business. And as I mentioned earlier, things like mobile are not a real threat just yet because it only accounted for 2% of the revenue in 2018. Dedicated video game consoles is still a very important thing for Nintendo, and it will continue to be that in the foreseeable future, at least under Furukawa. The second pillar is their mobile business, where they said a couple of very interesting things. They said that they're going to be continuing to make partnerships to expand how they do their mobile gaming initiative, how many games that they release. They're going to continue to sustain all the old games that they currently have scheduled or that they currently have released right now. Sorry, I'm messing this up a little bit. Basically, they plan to expand mobile as much as humanly possible, and they plan to seize any opportunity that they can, because mobile is very important and it makes a whole lot of sense. We live in a mobile society now. Everyone has a smart device. And if Nintendo's goal really is to expand the number of people that have access to their intellectual property, it just makes so much sense to put all of their intellectual properties, all of them, on mobile devices in some way, shape, or form. Why shouldn't Zelda be on a mobile device? Because if Zelda really is an important IP for them, then putting it on mobile in some way, shape, or form is going to introduce more people to Zelda who maybe have never known about that franchise before in the past. So this is no surprise to me, and it's also perfectly demonstrated in their partnership with Lion and creating Dr. Mario World. It seemingly came out of nowhere. Why are they partnering with a third corporation, a third company, to make a game that we've never even heard of up until this point? Well, they're being aggressive. They want to reach people in the same way possibly that Line reaches people. If you think about how pervasive Line could be as a social messaging app and how it probably permeates Japanese culture and connects all of these people, introducing each other to them, Nintendo probably wants a piece of that pie. So their second pillar after dedicated video game consoles is continuing to expand the mobile business. And lastly, it's just IP as a whole, intellectual property as a whole. Basically, things like merchandising and stuff like that. They want to encourage consumers to love Nintendo in as many ways possible, if that makes any sense. They just want to be everywhere. They mentioned a few projects that are going to work towards this goal. They said Super Nintendo World at Universal Studios Japan is going to be opening just in time for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. They mentioned the new Super Mario Brothers movie, which is being made by Illumination, saying that they expect that to come out in 2022. And they also mentioned the opening of the first official Nintendo shop in Japan. They're going to open very much like they have one in New York right now, but one in Japan called Nintendo Tokyo. So the 3 pillars that they're going to utilize to reach this overarching goal of expanding the number of people who have the access to Nintendo IP are they're going to continue to be in the video game console business. We're going to see Switches. Don't worry, they're not going anywhere. They're going to push forward as hard as they can in the mobile business, and they're going to spread their IP as far as wide in as many ways that they can think of, probably in every other way, including things like the cereal, Amiibo, TV shows, movies, theme parks, all of that. They want to be out there more than they ever have before. Because really, if you go back in time, 10 years, probably less than that, maybe like 5 or 6 years, that was not the case. Nintendo was very, very protective of their IP. And I'm not saying that they're being less careful now, because they're probably still being careful in vetting how they do these things. Otherwise, we probably would have seen a lot more from them by now. Like 2022 for that Super Mario Brothers movie, that seems so far away. I'm sure that if Nintendo wanted to get a motion picture out as soon as possible, they probably could have done that by now. But to wait with for their golden boy till they really nail it, which is what I'm assuming they're doing. I'm sure that they're being careful, but they're being more open, it seems like. They're willing to talk to more people, corporations like Line and all types of value propositions, all type of businesses that want to work with them, as long as they're going to make sure that they extend their IP in a way that benefits Nintendo and their overarching strategy. So, those are just some of the things that Furukawa talked about. He goes in a lot of granularity about a lot of these things, and you can learn more about, for instance, individual games. He talks about Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu, or sales figures for all types of regions. There's a bunch of stuff to unpack here. I tried my best to narrow it down to the really key important parts, the overall sales, the goal for Nintendo. I mean, that's huge, right? How Nintendo is going to steer the ship in the future, as well as the type of things, the type of initiatives that they're going to put in place to steer that ship into that future. But if you're interested in more of this, again, feel free to go to their website. And if you don't know where to find it, just reach out to me. I'll send you the link with everything that you need to know. Otherwise, I'm sure that you'll see tons and tons of articles written about all of this stuff in various pieces and forms as the news really digests with people and they really understand the gravitas of all of the things that Furukawa and Nintendo announced over these past couple of days. But honestly, that's it for the show. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And if you have any comments about any of the things that I talked about, you want to join that discussion, you want to participate in Heart Containers, or you just have feedback, suggestions, opinions, topics, you should and really should reach out to me by contacting the email address heartcontainerspodcast@gmail.com. Or if you want to get personal, I use Twitter all the time. Just follow me at Rome Fawaz, or if you don't want to follow me, just reach me at Rome Fawaz. That's ROMEFAWAZ, and we can talk about Nintendo to your heart's content. But until then, this has been Heart Containers episode number 5 for Friday, February 1st. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you real soon. But I'm really just going to go play a War Groove right now, so bye.